Hey, but, you know, I mean, I see here peace in our times. There is not going to be peace in our times. There are going to be, you know, everybody thinking, you know, says, oh, terrible thing, you know, the Syrian war. Well, the Syrian war started with extended drought. And you know, and there's going to be more and more of that. And it's like Seeger is a climatologist at, I think, at MIT, said, well, the people in the middle of the East had better get used to drought, because that's the new normal.
And the Southwest as well.
And the Southwest.
Any place, the desert area.
Yeah.
Oh, we can get started now.
Okay. Okay. I think most of you know me. My background is in Spanish. My doctoral work is in Spanish language and literature with an anthropology minor. And I've been with CCL and Citizens Climate Change Book Forum for 3 or 4 years. And this last year, I sat in on an environmental law class with Sarah Grossman, but it was still at a very fundamental level. But so this work that I've been doing, and I started it in January, and this is a follow-up more specifically with the law, ecological, and this is called Law of Ecological Commons. And in January, the work that I presented was David Bowyer, and I found a video that really encapsulated the notions of what the commons are about, and you'll get a history of that, a slight history of it during this presentation if you've forgotten that everyone's present to hear that. So that's my interest and background, and as a student of anthropology, I work with the indigenous a lot in New Mexico, the Pueblo, the Apaches, and the Navajos, mostly the Pueblos now. So I feel very deep kinship with some of the things that we'll be saying about the commons that is derivative from the indigenous land concept. So I'm going to tell you what this is about, and then I'm going to go through this PowerPoint. So to begin with, the readings for this presentation, I sent out about a month ago and explaining when we were going to be having our presentation as a preliminary, so if you wanted to read. And Dick and I have been talking about how we wish more people would literally read the topics and not come to hear a book review. So we're trying to promote more of actually reading. And one of the things about the Commons is that it has open access when we're talking about digital literature. So the primary text that I've used here is called Law of Ecological Commons by David Bowyer, and it is a completely open access text. And let me go to the next page. These are the 3 sources: Green Government by Bowyer, who has been a long time student of the Commons, and Weston, and then the Ecology of Law by Capra and Mackay. This is that book. Gary is the expert in this area of knowledge. It's my great interest and passion to be working with climate change. But this is an excellent book, and I'm going to give a quick resume of the 2 books that I don't use primarily, and then they will be part of the greater. Is Aubrey, you need to see that? Can you get a good close-up picture of it? Gary, you mind if we get that around so people can see it? So first, these are the sources. Perhaps you took an opportunity to read some of them. So I'm going to do the sources, a little background on each one of the sources. Then I'm going to give an explanation again of what is the commons, what's my reference. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about enclosures as contrast to the commons. Then I'm going to bring in, there's another term called common pool resource that is not necessarily a commons, or could be. I'm going to contrast that. Then I'm going to go to private property and how does private property contrast to the notion of the commons. And I'm going to give a little quick summary of how from the feudal ages we've come from land as it was looked at during the feudal ages when the commons was one way to look at land all the way up to free market and world trade, but it's very quick and not detailed. So I'm going to do that part. I'm going to include a section on indigenous land concepts, which I'm very dear to my heart, as I said before. Another doctrine that's used, and this was the first book I read on the idea of the commons, is by Mary Christina Wood, and her book is called Nature's Trust. So I give a small understanding of what the doctrine of trust is as an environmental law, and it's just a doctrine, it's not a law. So that's important. And then Elizabeth Ostrom in 2009 was a Nobel laureate in economics because of the research on the commons. She's a political scientist at the University of Indiana, probably retired by now. And then I'll give something about her work, limits of growth as well, and then give some examples, some 6 or 7 if we have time, examples of traditional commons that perhaps have lasted for thousands of years, and then some that are brand new commons, digital usage with an ecological base. So all of this has to do with trying to guard and save our natural resources from predatory neoliberal attack. So those are words that make people hot and bothered a lot of places, but it happens to be a truism. So here we go. I hope you can see. The material is fairly dense. It is somewhat repetitive, and it is not establishing a law, but it is giving a potential pattern that hopefully we can go toward. But this is not new. This is things that we've been thinking about for a long time in this past century, perhaps for the last 40 or 50 years anyway. So here are the sources that I just mentioned, and I'm going to give you a little background. Here's the green governance. I'll read this kind of quickly. You can read it for yourself if you wish. Western voluntary green governments are deeply concerned that free market economics has given rise to a legal apparatus and political system that elevates territorial sovereignty and material accumulation over shared stewardship of the natural environment. This is one of Valerie's topics throughout all this work. The result is destruction of the natural environment and the pursuit of maximum profit, private profit, privatizing, commodifying now, and the consequent abuse of the human right to a livable environment now and for future generations. This result can be seen in the inability of what they call the market state symbiosis embodying neoliberal principles to forestall the devastating effects of climate change and other global ecological disasters. They argue that an expanding common sector can help provide an alternative to both state and market. It would provide vernacular law governance dedicated to equitable and sustainable use of resources, what they call green governance. Instead of private owners free to do things with their property that harm the wider community environment, or government authorities imposing rigid rules and often arbitrary commands, the principles of human rights and environmental sustainability would be built into the basic rules governing the commons and would be applied by people who have a direct interest in their protection. Western body are far from proposing that the commons replace either market or state. Rather, they advocate that governments adopt policies designed to promote the formation and growth of commons. Governments can start and provide incentives much as they have done for corporations over the past few centuries. Now, these next 2 screens, these are the basics that I have used from the ecology of law. It's a paradigm shift in science and law. Now, this first screen is a mechanistic paradigm, world of machine. Let me just go to the other one real quickly, in the wrong direction. This second screen on the paradigm shift in science and law, systemic ecological paradigm, world as network. So world as machine versus world as network. Gary and I were talking about this before you all came in, that this world as machine is a reductionist idea, concept, starting probably before this, but starting with the Enlightenment, is it when it became a reality, so to speak. And we see many of us can suffer from this very notion. It's a lack of flexibility, it's black is black and white is white in a sense. So let's look through these kind of quickly, because this is all I'll be saying of this book. It seems to be a good synopsis of some of the important factors in it. And you'll see these concepts carried throughout the ideas of what commons are. Okay, so science in the mechanistic world is your world as a machine. Physical reality is an aggregate of separate building blocks. Science is knowledge used to dominate and control nature. Science truth, or laws of nature, can be arrived at through reasoning. Science description is objective, independent of human observer. Now let's look at the law quickly. Social reality is an aggregate, again, the word aggregate, of discrete individuals. Law used to protect extractive ownership as an individual right. Natural law based on human reason. Law is objective framework separate from human interpreter. Now look at this, or what most of us would say, a preferred way to see the world. Science, physical realities, network of inseparable relationships. Inseparable relationships. Science knowledge, or ecological literacy, which we use to learn from and cooperate with nature. Cooperate with nature, Science knowledge is always approximate, emerges from process of establishing consensus and scientific validity. Science description depends on the human observer and on the process of acquiring knowledge. Now, law. Social reality is composed of social networks and communities. New ecological legal order is to be used to equilibrate citizens to protect and generate commons. Law emerges from actively engaged citizens and self-organizing communities. Law is what deemed to be law by civic and legal communities depends on human interpretation of social reality. So you can see there's a great difference between mechanistic versus network. With Hugel, Matai, and Kutok-Capra. You may have recognized the name Capra, Web of Life, and the Tao of Physics. Physicist and ecologist, right, Gary? What you think? Is he in California at Berkeley, or where is he? Okay. So many of you may have been familiar with his name before. And Matai is a lawyer, a teacher of law, and also involved in the activism of environmentalism. So what exactly is a commons? A government system for using and protecting all creations of nature and society that we inherit jointly and freely and hold in trust for future generations. That's a very broad way to describe it. It's strongly broad, because that way it can embrace much more. Typically, a non-state resource controlled and managed by a defined community of commoners, directly or by delegation. The state may act as a trustee for a commons or formally facilitate specific commons, much as the state chartered of corporations for market activity. Usually, the commons is associated with a physical resource or a pool of physical resources, but most importantly, it's a cultural phenomenon. The relationships between people is what is so very important and makes it work. Primarily, a commons is about the self-determined norms, practices, and traditions that commoners devise for nurturing and protecting their shared resource. The origin of common interest is self-interest on a grander scale within a community. It operates without the centralized mandates of the state or structure of market exchange. Properly designed commons and sustainably managed, look at all what they can sustainably manage and have done so historically. So moving right along. Now, I don't talk much about a common pool resource, but if you remember a reference from Bollier's video about Garrett Hardin in 1968 and his strategy of the commons, some people have interpreted that is that the commons is old, defunct, not due for modern world. But what we've later discovered is that Garrett Hardin actually was trying to promote privatizing and commodifying land. So common pool resource has to do with some of the reasoning that Garrett Hardin in the Tragedy of the Commons said, no, commons are no good, so let's see real quick what a common pool resource can be. CPR is a good, which is often depletable, usually expensive to prevent others from using, but not impossible. It's subtractable. It can become used up or be congested. And here's some examples of socioeconomic political arrangements for protecting and maintaining a CPR. For example, government taking charge of a river irrigation system and deciding who may have what quantities of water under what terms. Or a private owner managing a forest CPR enabling utterly exclusive control of the right to sell access and use rights to others, treated as open access regime in which there are no pre-existing property rights or rules for managing the resource. Everyone treats the water, fish, or timber as free for the taking, and that's one of the big distinctions right there between commons. Now here are the opposite. These are the enclosures that we all as environmentalists get so upset about nowadays, where we see private corporations being able to come in and take over with governmental okay or EPA okay or however we might proceed. Modern market economies and liberal state policies marginalize the commons as a system of management and culture. Marginalize them. Mainstream economists present that individual property rights and market exchange are the most efficient, responsible means for allocating access and use of natural resources and for generating material wealth and, notice in quotes, progress. The commons is seen as a failed management system or inefficient vestige of free modern life. As market enclosures have intensified over the past 30 years, interest in the commons has surged. Enclosures occur with private business enterprises, often with overt support of government or law, privatize and or commodify ecological resources owned or used by distinct community or ethically belonging to everyone. Here's examples. The enclosure aims to reap private market gains for common asset without taking account of its full, long-time market or non-market value, seen as intrusions upon recognized commons or public property, particularly when they rely upon coercion, disenfranchisement, underpayment, or simple trespass. Justified, though, an enclosure is, as a necessary means to increase production of material wealth. The appropriated lands or resources are regarded as vacant or belonging to no one, res nullis, and therefore without value in the first place. This is the European concept when they came to this continent and looked at lands that the Indians lived on, but because the indigenous had property sense, or pardon me, land value sense, so totally different from ownership as Europeans had already developed, they considered all the lands here were for the taking. The Europeans did, and called it res nullius. Here's more information on the same. To victimize commoners who had used a now appropriated resource in a collective fashion for non-market subsistence purposes, subsistence is important there, enclosures experienced as a profound dispossession and violation. For them, naming a commons as a commons is the first step toward protecting and reclaiming the resources. Tolerated and welcomed by some, these enclosures are, because one person's enclosure is another person's idea of freedom and progress. There can be enormous private economic gains generated by trading natural resources into marketable products. Some of these seem like things we absolutely know about.
That can't be good.
Oh, no. Excuse me. But the information is building.
It didn't break anything.
As we move along, the information that I'm giving is helping build a reason, as in perhaps a legal reason for justification of commons as a concept to guard our natural resources. So, as I say, this may seem very logical to all of us because we're environmentalists, but it's important. It produces many secondary spillover benefits these enclosures do for societies such as